Have you ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally? Someone who should have been your shelter, your champion, your first believer? I have. And the person who did it wasn't a stranger, wasn't a boss, wasn't a rival. It was my mother. And she did it in front of everyone I'd ever tried to impress. It was Thanksgiving Day, 2016. My grandmother's house in Connecticut, the same house where 5 generations of our family had gathered for holidays since 1942. The dining room was filled with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, the sound of crystal glasses clinking, the golden light of afternoon sun filtering through lace curtains that my great-grandmother had sewn by hand. There were 37 people in that room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, family friends who might as well have been blood. And there I was, 29 years old, standing in the doorway wearing my hotel management uniform for the first time in front of my family. I had just been promoted to assistant general manager at one of the most prestigious hotels in Boston. It was the proudest moment of my career. I'd worked 7 years to get there, starting as a front desk clerk at 19, working my way up through housekeeping supervision, guest relations, operations management. I'd earned that uniform, the navy blazer with gold buttons, the name tag that said assistant general manager. I thought my family would be proud. I thought my mother would finally see me. Instead, she looked at me from across the room, set down her wine glass, and laughed. Not a warm laugh. Not an amused chuckle. A sharp, cutting sound that silenced the entire room. "Look at you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Playing dress-up like a little girl. You look like a flight attendant who got lost." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My aunt covered her mouth. My cousin looked away. And my mother just smiled. That smile I knew so well. The one that said she'd won something I didn't even know we were competing for. I stood there. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I felt my face go hot and my hands go cold. And I thought about walking out. But I didn't. I walked to my seat at the far end of the table. The seat I'd been assigned since I was 12 years old, away from the adults who mattered, and I sat down. I ate my meal in silence. And when it was over, I drove 3 hours back to Boston in the dark, alone with my uniform still on, and I didn't cry until I pulled into my apartment parking lot. But that was only the beginning. Before I tell you why that moment changed everything, let me take you back. Because you need to understand who my mother was, who I was, and why that uniform meant more than fabric and buttons. I grew up in the shadow of a family empire. My grandfather founded a chain of luxury hotels in 1958. Starting with one small property in Hartford and building it into a group of 12 hotels across New England. By the time I was born, the Whitfield Hotel Group was worth over $200 million. My mother was the eldest of 4 children and she was supposed to inherit the company. But she didn't. My grandfather passed it to my uncle instead, his only son, because that's what men of his generation did. They gave empires to sons and gave daughters trust funds and expectations of marriage. My mother never recovered from that decision. She married my father, a banker from New York, and spent the next 30 years proving she was better than everyone who'd overlooked her. She joined charity boards. She organized galas. She wore designer clothes and drove European cars and made sure everyone knew she was a Whitfield, even if she didn't control the Whitfield name. And she raised me to be exactly like her, to marry well, to look beautiful. To never work a day in my life because work was for people who didn't have choices, but I didn't want her life. I didn't want to be a trophy on someone's arm. I didn't want to spend my days planning dinner parties and judging other women's outfits. I wanted to build something. I wanted to earn something. And the only thing I knew, the only thing that ran through my blood, was hotels. When I was 16, I got a summer job at the front desk of one of our family's hotels. My mother was furious. She said it was beneath me that people would talk, that I was embarrassing the family name, but I loved it. I loved the rhythm of check-ins and check-outs, the puzzle of room assignments, the art of making strangers feel welcome. I loved the crisp white sheets and the fresh flowers in the lobby, and the way the building hummed with 1,000 small acts of service. I felt alive in that hotel in a way I never felt at home. And that was the moment I stopped being who they thought I was. I went to college for hospitality management. My mother didn't come to my graduation. She said she had a migraine, but I saw the photos on social media later that day. Her at a luncheon with her friends, laughing, holding a glass of champagne. When I got my first real job, she told me it was a phase. When I got promoted to supervisor, she said I was wasting my potential. When I became assistant manager, she stopped asking about my work altogether. It was as if my career existed in a parallel universe she refused to acknowledge. But I kept going. I kept learning. I kept climbing. Because every time she dismissed me, every time she looked through me like I wasn't there, I added another brick to the wall I was building. A wall made of competence, of expertise, of proving that I could succeed without her approval, without the family money, without the connections she'd always dangled over my head like a reward I'd never quite earn. Have you ever felt something like this? That hunger to prove yourself to someone who refuses to see you. The years passed. I became known in the industry as someone who could turn struggling properties around. I restructured operations at 3 different hotels, increasing revenue, improving guest satisfaction scores, building teams that actually wanted to work. I was recruited by competitors. I was offered partnerships. And through it all, my family treated me like I was playing a game that didn't count. At holiday gatherings, they'd ask about my love life, never my work. They'd talk about my cousin's promotions at the family company like those were real achievements, while my accomplishments existed in some lesser category. I didn't know it yet, but the world was about to change. In 2019, my uncle announced he was retiring. After 40 years running the Whitfield Hotel Group, he was stepping down, and the board was searching for a new CEO. Everyone assumed it would be my cousin Bradley, his son who'd been groomed for the position since birth. Bradley had an MBA from Wharton. Bradley had a corner office. Bradley had never worked a front desk or cleaned a room or solved a guest complaint in his life, but he had the name and the face and the presumption of inheritance. The board meeting was scheduled for December 15th. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even informed. I found out from my aunt, who mentioned it casually at a birthday party, assuming I already knew. "The transition will be good for Bradley," she said. "He's ready." I nodded and said nothing, but inside something shifted. Something old and tired and patient finally woke up. I went home that night and wrote a letter, not to my mother, not to my uncle, to the board of directors. I outlined my qualifications, my experience, my vision for the company. I included data from every property I'd managed, every turnaround I'd led, every innovation I'd implemented. I wrote about the future of hospitality, about how the industry was changing, about what the Whitfield Group needed to survive the next 50 years, and I applied for the CEO position. I didn't tell anyone. Not my husband, not my colleagues, not my therapist. I just sent the letter and waited. Stay with me until the end. It's worth it. 3 weeks later, I got a call. The board wanted to meet with me. They'd reviewed my application and they were impressed. They wanted to know more about my ideas, my approach, my commitment to the family legacy. I took a personal day from work and drove to Hartford. I sat in a conference room with 8 people who'd known me since I was a child, and I pitched myself like I was a stranger, because to them, they'd never seen me as anything but Margaret's difficult daughter, the one who'd chosen work over marriage, career over family, independence over tradition. The meeting lasted 4 hours. They asked hard questions. They challenged my assumptions. They pushed back on my proposals. And I answered every single one, not with anger, not with defensiveness, with clarity. With data, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 15 years preparing for a moment she didn't know was coming. When it was over, the chairman, a man named Richard who'd been friends with my grandfather, shook my hand and said, "I wish we'd talked sooner." The vote was scheduled for January. I went back to my job, back to my life, and I waited again. I didn't tell my mother. Part of me wanted to surprise her. Part of me wanted to protect myself from her disappointment if I failed. And part of me, the part I'm not proud of, wanted her to find out with everyone else. Wanted her to experience the same shock she'd given me so many times. The call came on January 3rd, 2020. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. It was Richard. "Congratulations," he said. "The vote was unanimous. You're our new CEO." I hung up the phone. I sat very still, and then I cried. Not tears of joy, not exactly. Tears of release, of all the years of trying, of all the nights of doubt, of the little girl who stood in that Thanksgiving doorway humiliated and somehow kept walking. The announcement was scheduled for the company's annual gala in February. 300 people would be there. Industry leaders, investors, employees, family. My mother would be there. She never missed a Whitfield event. It was her stage, her chance to remind everyone who she was, even if the company had never been hers. I remember getting dressed that evening. I wore a black gown, simple and elegant. My husband zipped up the back and kissed my shoulder and told me he was proud of me. I looked at myself in the mirror and I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She was calm. She was ready. She was no longer waiting for permission. The gala was held at the original Whitfield Hotel, the one my grandfather had built with his own hands. The ballroom was filled with crystal chandeliers and white roses and the soft hum of a string quartet. I walked in alone. My husband was parking the car. My mother was already there, holding court by the bar, wearing emerald green and laughing too loudly at someone's joke. She saw me across the room. Our eyes met. She looked away. And then Richard took the stage. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about my grandfather's legacy, about the company's history, about the challenges and opportunities ahead. And then he said the words I'd waited my whole life to hear. It is my honor to introduce the new Chief Executive Officer of the Whitfield Hotel Group. A woman of extraordinary vision, dedication, and integrity. A woman who has proven herself in every role she's held, who has earned the respect of everyone she's worked with, and who carries forward the best of our founder's spirit. Please join me in welcoming ... Catherine Whitfield Porter. The room went silent. Then applause began, slow at first, then building, wave after wave of sound washing over me as I walked toward the stage. I passed my mother on the way. She was frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, her face a mask of something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not pride, something closer to recognition. Like she was finally seeing me for the first time. I took the microphone. I looked out at 300 faces, some confused, some delighted, some calculating what this meant for their own positions. And I spoke. When I was 19 years old, I said, I got my first job at a Whitfield hotel. I worked the front desk. I learned how to smile at difficult guests and solve problems no one else wanted to touch. I fell in love with this industry, with these hotels, with the idea that every day you get the chance to make someone's experience a little better. I didn't take that job because I had to. I took it because I wanted to understand what my grandfather built. Not from a boardroom. From the ground up. I paused. Found my mother's face in the crowd. Some people thought I was playing dress-up. Some people thought I was wasting my potential. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that real leadership isn't inherited. It's earned. It's earned in the early mornings and the late nights. It's earned in the small decisions that no one sees. It's earned by showing up every single day and doing the work. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was real. People stood up. My husband was crying. My aunt was crying. Even Richard, who'd seen everything in his 70 years, wiped his eyes. And my mother walked toward me through the crowd. She stopped in front of me. She looked at me, really looked, for what felt like the first time in my entire life. And she said very quietly, so only I could hear, I was wrong. I was so wrong about you. I didn't say, it's okay. Because it wasn't okay. What she'd done had hurt me deeply and for decades, but I also didn't push her away. I just nodded. I let her words land. And then I said, I know. That night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the empty hotel. I ran my fingers along the marble walls. I stood in the lobby where I once checked in guests and helped lost tourists find their rooms. And I thought about the uniform I'd worn to that Thanksgiving dinner 3 years earlier. The uniform my mother had mocked. I still had it, hanging in the back of my closet. I'd never been able to throw it away. I wear a different uniform now. Tailored suits, designer shoes, the polished armor of corporate leadership. But underneath, I'm still that girl at the front desk. Still that woman in the navy blazer with gold buttons trying to prove she belonged. The difference is I don't need anyone else to believe it anymore. I believe it myself. My mother and I talk now. Not often, not easily, but we talk. She's never apologized directly for that Thanksgiving. I don't think she knows how. But she's stopped dismissing my work. She's stopped pretending my career doesn't exist. Last Christmas, she asked me about our expansion plans. She listened. She even asked a follow-up question. It's not much, but it's more than I ever expected. Have you ever felt something like this? That quiet peace of being seen finally by someone who spent years looking away? I'm 46 now. I've been CEO for 5 years. We've opened 4 new properties, survived a pandemic that nearly destroyed the industry, and emerged stronger than we've ever been. But the achievement I'm proudest of isn't on any financial report. It's the mentorship program I started for young women in hospitality. Women like I was. Women who don't have family connections or trust funds or anyone telling them they can succeed. I meet with them once a month. I tell them my story. I tell them about the Thanksgiving when my mother laughed at my uniform. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Your worth is not determined by the people who can't see you. Your potential is not limited by the boxes others build for you. Your success does not require their approval. You just have to keep going. Keep working. Keep believing in the version of yourself they refuse to imagine. Share this with someone who would understand. Someone who's been dismissed by the people who should have championed them. Someone who's still waiting for permission to become who they already are. Because here's what I've learned. The people who mock you often see something in you that threatens them. My mother didn't laugh at my uniform because she thought I was foolish. She laughed because she was terrified. Terrified that I might succeed where she had failed. Terrified that I might prove that the life she'd built on resentment and appearances wasn't the only option. Terrified that I might become something she'd never had the courage to try. Her laughter wasn't about me, it was about her. And understanding that changed everything. I still have that navy blazer. I keep it in a glass case in my office now, right next to my grandfather's original hotel key from 1958. When people ask about it, I tell them it's a reminder. A reminder of where I started, of what I survived. Of the girl who stood in a doorway, humiliated, and chose to keep walking instead of running away. Truth does not shout. It simply waits to be heard. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, if you're brave enough, if you're willing to do the work when no one's watching, the people who doubted you will finally hear it too. Not because you convinced them. Because you became undeniable. If stories like this remind you what dignity feels like, subscribe, you belong here. And don't miss the next story. It is something truly unforgettable.